Alrighty, we are going to program the Donut Shop exercise from Zach's Programming with Visual Basic 2019-2022. This is Chapter 6, Exercise 7, the first intermediate example of the Donut Shop. And the Donut Shop, we're going to have to build this form here. Create the interface that looks like this. When coding the application, use one independent sub-procedure to determine the total, okay, which is the cost without sales tax, and then a function to determine the sales tax, and then an event handling sub-procedure to clear the output. So I imagine that means when you change something, the output gets cleared. So let me just grab this and throw it out of the way. And I'm making Donut Shop. This is a Windows format, .NET framework in VB, and project and solution I'm doing in the same directory because there's only one project in this solution. Okay, so to start, we're going to build this Donut Shop form. And you know how to do this by now, but let's just review what's going on. We have a label up top here. I've got 3 different group boxes, one for donut choices, coffee choices, and then the subtotal, sales tax, total due. These are labels. They're labels, or you can use read-only text boxes, which I prefer, but I'm going to do it as labels. I think that's what the book wants. And 2 buttons, calculate and exit. And the form looks really nice. It opens in the center of the screen, name it and everything. So I'm going to do all this stuff, and then you can maybe you want to pause the video, build it yourself, and then come back in a moment. All right, so I have my form. Everything's spaced out nicely. It looks like I might have a little spacing issue in here. This looks a little tight compared to these two. My labels look a little short, but otherwise, it looks like what I have is pretty close to what the book has. So let me just fix a couple spacing issues here. Yep, that was off by a little bit. I want these to be just a bit taller. All right, we'll see how this looks. Good enough to start. And I already programmed my exit button. So we need to use an independent sub-procedure to determine the subtotal. And then a function to determine the sales tax, and an event handling sub-procedure to clear the output. All right, so I'm going to look at BTN calculate because the user is going to click on the calculate button, right? Let me make my text a little bit larger here for you. And when the user clicks on the calculate button, I need to use an independent subprocedure to determine the total, and then use a function to determine the sales tax. And then eventually I'll need to use an event handling subprocedure to clear the output. And I like putting my exit at the bottom because that's the last thing you do in the application. So I like sticking it down there at the bottom. All right, so once we determine the subtotal and we get the sales tax, then we need to add the subtotal, that's one word, to the sales tax and show that in total due. All right, so I'm going to say dim, use doubles, double subtotal. Sorry, my brain's having a moment. I haven't coded in VB in about a week. Been busy with other languages. So this is going to be as a double. And notice it's underlined in green because I haven't used that yet, right? And then I'm going to say dim DBL sales tax as double is equal to, and I think I could do this, but I'm going to say right now, let's see, do we want to call it get sales tax or calculate sales tax? I'm going to use calculate sales tax. And to determine the sales tax, oh, they don't tell us what the tax rate is. We're going to make that up. To determine the sales tax, we have to give it DBL subtotal, right? Because the only way to determine the sales tax is by knowing what the subtotal is. And I'm going to make a private const called sales tax, and that's going to be equal to, well, where I live, it's 0.08, okay? So now we have this red squiggly, and it says this is not declared, right? We haven't declared this function yet. If we look at potential fixes, it says, do you want to generate that method? And yes, I do. That's exactly what I want to do. I want you to make that function for me. So there we go. VB created that for me. But let's review what's happening. All right, because there's actually a few things going on here. It's a private function. So it is a function within my class. Because it's private, it can only be called from within this class, right? From public class FRM main to end class. That's the only time you can call this function. And that's okay because this is the only place we are calling it. Our functions start with a verb and they describe what this is returning or what this is doing. So this is going to calculate sales tax is what it's doing, right? This calculate as a verb. It's taking in one argument, which is subtotal. Remember up here, I declared subtotal as a double. When Visual Studio created this function for me, it already said that because I passed a double in as an argument, the parameter in my function signature is automatically created as a double. Visual Studio took care of that for me. And this function is returning a double, right? So we have this function as a double means that it needs to return a double. And the reason Visual Studio knew that is because I said dim DBL sales tax as double is equal to this. All right. So within this function, what do we want to do? I'm going to kind of, well, I want to, actually, it can really be just one line, right? All I want to do is return DBL subtotal times sales tax. That's all that this function needs to do. And you know what? This is a terrible name. Let's call this sales tax rate. Okay. Back to this point. Sorry, I just crashed Visual Studio completely. That's not good. So we're renaming sales tax to sales tax rate. I don't want to get confused with my sales tax and the rate of sales tax. All right. Now, functions return things. and every path of your function needs to return something. So this function happens to be one line, and it's just return DBL subtotal times sales tax rate. So that is my function, but I also need a private sub that will determine the subtotal. And when we determine the subtotal, there's a couple different ways we can do it. I'm going to do it with no arguments. It's not a function, so it doesn't return anything. And this is it. My entire subprocedure name is just determine subtotal. Because from determine subtotal, I can actually access, which of these radio buttons is checked. All right, we're going to continue from here, although you'll quickly see what a problem is. Because I need to take whatever I figure out in here and put it back up into DBL subtotal. So what I need to do is I'm going to call determine subtotal. I'm going to actually pass DBL subtotal to it. And I'm going to pass this, and I don't remember where I'm going to. Okay, by ref goes in the beginning. So by ref, what that means is we're not passing the value of DBL subtotal into determine subtotal. What we're passing in is a pointer back to this spot in memory. So this is how we can use a subprocedure to modify a value without returning anything. Okay, because otherwise, really determine subtotal, I would use a function that just makes more sense. But the book specifically says to use an independent subprocedure. An independent meaning subprocedures that are not connected to any object and event, right? Because otherwise we have event handling subprocedures, and that's what we've been using all along. This is an independent subprocedure. There's no event handler at the end here. Okay, so I could just say here, if RDO none, then really no coffee selected. I'm going to do coffee. I'm writing my coffee out stuff first. Sorry, RDO none dot checked. This is the coffee stuff. Else if RDO regular dot checked, then what I'm going to do is DBL subtotal plus equals, and I need to pull up the form again. Our regular coffee costs $1.50. And if you ordered a cappuccino, then DBL subtotal adds $2.75. I'm just doing the coffee right now. I'll come back and do the donut in a moment. But notice we don't return anything because it's a subprocedure. Okay, but as we're modifying DBL subtotal, it's modifying whatever was passed in directly. So let's just do this right now. I'm going to say LBL subtotal, and actually it makes more sense to put it up here. LBL subtotal dot text is equal to DBL subtotal. DBL subtotal is a decimal, so we're going to make it to a string. And because we're dealing with money, we'll send C2 in, C being currency, 2 being 2 decimal places. Let's check this out. So at least now if I say no coffee, that's 0. If I say regular coffee, it's $1.50. Cappuccino, $2.75. All right. So for coffee, this was fine. There's only 3 choices. But when we get to donuts, and the one thing I don't like about this application is that we call this thing Donut Shoppe, D-O-N-U-T, but we call the items that we're eating donuts, D-O-U-G-H. Anyway, I don't like they spell it 2 different ways. But I don't want to write out the if then, else if then, end if. Okay, I want to use a select casing here. And on radio buttons, it's kind of funny how we do select cases, because normally what we're looking for is we have a select case. So let me do Control KX to pull up my snippets. So I'm holding down Control. I hit K, then X. I never let go of Control. And then when this menu comes up, I let go of Control. I hit the down arrow to go to code patterns. I want, what do I want? I want conditional and loop. And I want a select case. So normally, like they're showing here, your select case runs on a variable name, and we're checking to see if it's equal to this. If it's equal to that, this is true, and that case runs. If it's equal to 2, this is true, and that case runs. But on radio buttons, we flip it around. So we say, find the one that's true. Okay, and in the case that it is glazed, then I'm going to say DBL subtotal plus equals $1.05. Case RDO sugar dot checked. DBL subtotal plus equals $1.05. Okay, we have then a little bit of copy paste. RDO chocolate. So I use RDO as my prefix to radio buttons. I know some people use, well, in our book uses rad. I don't know where that came from. Take these lines, Control D. I have one more, and that's RDO filled dot checked. If you have a filled donut, it's going to cost you $1.50. And we have no else, and that's it. So an alternate method to using a select case on radio buttons. And let's check this out. I'm just going to do something with some simple math. If I order nothing, that's a whole zero. I have a regular coffee and a filled donut, $3, right? $1.50, $1.50. Okay, so this is looking good. Our math works out. So again, with this sub procedure, we're passing DBL subtotal by reference. And when you pass an argument in by reference, it is receiving a pointer to this original variable. All right, by default, what you pass in, like this, is being passed in by value. And if I change this down here, it does not change it up here. Okay, when you pass something by value, which is the default, think of literally the value of this variable gets sent in. Okay, so we use an independent sub procedure to determine the total and display it in the label. Use a function to determine the sales tax and display it in the label. And then add it and show that in the total due. So LBL total due dot text is equal to DBL sales tax plus DBL subtotal dot toString as currency. Oops, we didn't display this thing. So LBL sales tax dot text is double sales tax toString C2. Run this one more time. I want a chocolate donut and a coffee. $2.75. Tax is 22 cents. Total due is $2.97. That looks pretty good. Now, we did learn in this chapter that we could have rounding errors, which I don't know if I'm going to be able to get one here. Probably not, because we're just adding things together, so we're always getting the same, rounding the same way and everything. But just even to make better code, when we're working with our values, we could round them where appropriate. Okay, so where would it be appropriate to round it? Really, if we're always going to round the subtotal after determining the subtotal, we can put it right in here. So right at the very end, I can say DBL subtotal equals math.round DBL subtotal 2 decimal places. Okay. In this case, instead of this, I'm going to return math dot, and I cut that because now I'm pasting it back in. Okay. So we don't have to worry about rounding up here. The rounding's happening within our sub procedure and within our function. And notice this function is still one line. All right, it's not an extremely long line. It's doing a bunch of things. It's multiplying two numbers together. It's rounding it, and then it's returning that value. You could break this up into multiple lines if you wanted to, but then there's no need to round up here. This is already rounded at this point. It's rounded at this point, and then when we add two rounded numbers together, we don't have to worry about rounding again. So just make sure we'll throw those mathed out rounds in there to make our application a little bit more complete. All right. We did not yet use an event handling subprocedure to clear the output. So what we're going to do is I'm going to click on this radio button, hold down Control, click on the next one, 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 and the next one. All my radio buttons are now checked. And I'm going to go to Events for those radio buttons. And I'm looking for Check Changed. So I find Check Changed here. And if you see it maybe like in this order with categories, click on the alphabetical listing. It's easier to find things. Check Changed. So when any of these things change, I want to clear labels. I just type in clear labels. The clear is all lowercase. The first L in labels is uppercase. I hit enter. And it gives me the subprocedure already that handles when any of these radio buttons are check changed. Okay, and what I'm going to do then is LBL subtotal text is equal to nothing. LBL sales tax dot text is equal to nothing, and LBL total due dot text is equal to nothing. So that is it right here. Oops. Clean up my code a little bit. Again, I want my exit button at the bottom. There's really no need to put the exit button at the bottom. I just prefer it. Okay. And like, notice my code, how this section is for donuts, and I have a blank line up on top and a blank line underneath it. All right. And then this section is for coffee. And then this does something. This is rounding it. Okay. Maybe I put a comment above that. Round the subtotal. Okay. Now look at this code, how clean it is and how easy it is to read, versus, let me just remove the blank lines. Okay. Look how messy that is. And if I took the comments out, even worse. Okay, this is not easy code to read, especially because we have a select and then we run into ifs and all this stuff. So hopefully I can undo this. There we go. Make your code easier to read by finding sections that are related. Like this section is related. This is all the subtotal stuff. This is all the sales tax stuff. This is all the total due stuff, right? And put it together. I have all my function declarations up at the top. And I even like to put a blank line to start a subprocedure, because our subprocedures actually can run into multiple lines like this. Well, hang on. Put an underscore here. Okay. Run into multiple lines. So this handles button calculate.click. Is that part of the subprocedure, or is it part of the subprocedure signature? And actually, I guess not really a signature, but the declaration. And it's actually part of the declaration. Okay. So by putting in a blank line, I know this is the body of my subprocedure. All right, let's check all this out. There's a lot of extra information there. So if I say I want regular coffee and chocolate donut, there's our values. If I switch this to sugar, it wipes that out. If I change my coffee, it wipes it out until I hit calculate. We have my alt button, so I can switch to a filled donut. I can switch to a cappuccino, and then I can calculate. I did all that with the keyboard. I can hit escape, and my window closes. The only thing I want to check, and I didn't do when I created my form design, I want to view tab order. My tab order is a mess, like it's starting down here. Okay. So like I'm reading a book, I'm I'm going to set my tab order. I'm going to go to coffee choices. Over here. Okay, much better tab order. Save that. And, normally you can just say, yeah, let's go ahead and submit this now. I changed something. So run it one more time and test it one more time. I'm going to Alt. I want a. Oh, and look at that. Because I tested it one more time, I just realized I put the access key for C on chocolate and calculate. Oops. For chocolate, the access key should be on H. Okay, one more time. I want I hit calculate. Chocolate donut with regular coffee, calculate. Great. That all worked. All just by using the keyboard as well. So there is the Donut Shop application.